Hello, I'm Thomas Taplin and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Now, as well as bringing you up-to-date market news and analysis, we also try to bring you expert opinions on global conflicts, as they too can have a real effect on the markets. Today I'm joined by Chatham House Associate Fellow and International Relations and Social Sciences Programme Director of Regent's College in London, Yossi Mekelberg, to examine the Israel-Palestine conflict at its current stage. Thanks for joining me today, Yossi. Now, the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine has once again flared up, but there's a slight difference here in that Egypt, whose city Rafah borders Gaza, has a new government, a government born off the back of a revolution, if you like. Has this changed anything?
Well, the conflict itself indeed is not new, and the root causes of that go to the beginning of the 20th century, definitely with the partition plan in 1947, and from then on the war of 1948 and wars later, and the inability actually to resolve the basic element of having two states for two people, the Israelis and Palestinians. For many decades, we got used to see almost the same leaders around the region, whether it's Mubarak in Egypt or the Assad in Syria, of course the royal families, and this is changing very swiftly. On the one hand, for the first time, you actually have legitimate governments in these countries because they were elected fairly and squarely in elections. And the President Morsi of Egypt is no different in this sense. But on the other hand, we have more and more Islamist parties actually win elections, and they're coming in different shapes and forms when it comes to ideology. At the same time, President Morsi is the president of Egypt, and he is, in his capacity right now, has to look at the interests of Egypt. And one of its main aim is to prevent escalation between Israel and Palestinians, to prevent a ground invasion that will result in many casualties. By that, also not to risk the peace with Israel, and not, of course, prevent hundreds potentially dead among the Palestinians, and creates more instability in the region. And the Arab Spring creates, in one way, some challenges, but also creates opportunity.
Now, Israel's Finance Minister Yuval Steinitz has recently said he will hold back tax revenues to the Palestinian Authority if the country bids for statehood with the United Nations. Firstly, who does this money actually belong to, and how will this potential move by Israel affect costs on the ground?
Well, Gaza is a very small place with very little resources and one of the most populated territories in the world. There's 1.6 million people living in a very small area. They are blockaded. There is not much outlet even now after the Arab Spring to Egypt, because the Egyptians not necessarily open the Rafah crossing every day. It's close to Israel. It means huge economic pressure inside Gaza, with very high level of unemployment, especially youth unemployment at 40%, high number of people living under the poverty line, and even those who live above the poverty line, many of them live above the poverty line just because international organizations like UNRWA support them on a daily basis, from the very basic of food, education, health. Without the help of international organization, it will be even a poorer place. Now, part of the agreement between the Palestinians and Israel since the Oslo agreement is with tax revenue. It's quite a complicated arrangement, but this money is basically Palestinian money. But the Israeli can use it as a political tool whenever they think that the Palestinians don't behave according to their expectation, either politically or militarily, and of course, this increases the pressure. Bear in mind that these revenues are not going to Gaza since Hamas was elected. There is a total boycott on the Hamas government. All this money, when it comes, actually goes to the Palestinian Authority led by President Abbas and Prime Minister Salam Fayyad.
It's important to look at the economic side of this conflict as well, as we touched on briefly in your last answer. What's your assessment of this particular conflict going forward from an economic standpoint?
Well, the economic situation, especially in Gaza, in the West Bank, is much better. Economic situation in Gaza, as you look at the unemployment figures, poverty figures, lack of economic activity, is horrendous. The only reason that it keeps afloat is because of handouts from the outside. Some of the money to the Hamas comes from Iran. More openly, the Qataris offered $250 million to support Gaza. But the reality wars create destruction, even further destruction, at a time that, for instance, Israel won't let cement to be imported into Gaza. Part of the population relies on fishing, but because of the blockade, they are not allowed to fish whenever they want, to whatever distance from the shore they want. Israel uses it as a security measure, but it means that, for the fishermen, for the trawler, it's more difficult to catch fish. It's from the very basic. Let alone that there is a government, the Hamas, and I don't think all the onus should put on Israel. A lot of it should, but also a government that is less than functioning. A lot of the Gazan economy is underground, literally and figuratively speaking, going through tunnels, less now than before the Arab Spring. It means there is no accountability in Gaza, there is no transparency, and many people that are refugees with no job.
Okay, thanks for that, Yossi. This is, of course, a topic we could talk about for hours, but unfortunately we have to end it there. I'll be back tomorrow with the press review, but for now, goodbye.